Hi, I'm Benny Jr. with Bartow Ford. You've heard me talk about all of our awards and sales numbers, but sometimes we fail to mention what really makes that happen. Simply put, that's our culture. Our founding father, Ernest Smith, a long time ago, came up with a philosophy that said, take care of the customers, take care of the employees, and take care of the community that you live in. My father carried on that tradition and taught it to me. We have not strayed from that philosophy for over 73 years, nor will we ever, because at Bartow Ford, we're different, and we prove it.
Blog Talk Radio.
To be an MMA fan. There was a fight Thursday, 2 fights Saturday. It's like you can't even catch your breath. 1 minute there's a fight going on, and you think, all right, I got a little time before the next fight, and then all of a sudden there's another fight again. Like Scott said last week, remember the days where it'd be like a month, 2 months in between fights? Nope, now they're falling out of the sky like oh so many raindrops. Hello, and welcome to the 411 Ground and Pound radio show. I am your host, Mark Radulich, and I am happy to be here despite most of the people who go to the 401 site calling me a douchebag for the way I scored the Diego Sanchez-Campman fight. We're going to talk about that, and I'm going to explain why you're all wrong. No, we're going to explain why I thought the fight should have been scored that way in just a moment. We want you to call in and tell us what you thought about that fight, what you thought about Dan Henderson shocking the world last night and capturing the Strikeforce light heavyweight title. And we want to hear your thoughts about another controversial finish in the Bellator 35 bout between Jay Huron and Mr. Lapsley. The number to call in is 323-657-0901. We are taking your calls this hour. 323-657-0901. Got a lot to talk about today. Got the UFC on versus 3 card to get through. Strikeforce Cavalcante versus Hendo, Bellator 35. We want to talk a little bit about some of the things going on in the world of MMA, so I'm not going to waste a lot of time with a big opening spiel. I want to get right to it. Why in God's green earth would I score Diego Sanchez over Martin Kampmann? Why, you're asking? What would possess? I don't know how to score fights. That's what you think, some of you, right? Let me explain myself. Let me put my evidence to the jury. When I do live coverage, I really try to come at it from the most objective point of view. It's not an opinion column, so I try to do it as if I were actually calling the fight. So when I score the fight, I'm not necessarily scoring it based on my opinion. Because if you were to say, hey, Mark Radulich, who won that fight between Diego Sanchez and Martin Kampmann on UFC on versus 3 card? I would have said Martin Kampmann. I really think he did win the fight. I don't have an issue saying that. I said that the night that it happened. Looked over at my wife, and I'm like, who do you think won that one? And she said, no, I think Martin Kampmann. I would say I would agree. Here's the problem. The judges use a different criteria than the one I might employ. Yes, I've read through the unified rules of fighting. I've looked at the scoring system. I've tried to, figure out exactly what it is they're looking for. But, my opinion is my opinion, and sometimes it doesn't match what the judges think. When I scored that fight, I scored it based on what I thought the judges would see. Now, based on the last year of watching MMA and seeing some truly horrendous decisions, matched with my ability to kind of get in the mind of people and figure out how they think and why they think the way that they do. Trained therapist and all. That's what I do. I look at their desire to see aggression and pressing the action in a fight. For some, and you've got to remember, these are also boxing judges, as near as I can tell. So while a boxing judge looks for punches thrown versus punches landed, and if you land, for boxing they want you to land more punches than not, obviously. And if you're just throwing wildly but you're not landing nothing, no, you're not going to pick up scoring. Well, for some odd reason, MMA judges, though they come from like a boxing philosophy, seem to like the punches and bunches approach to things. So when Diego Sanchez is essentially doing the gorilla, for those of you who are hardcore Punk fans, he's out there just throwing windmills. He was pressing the action like a Tasmanian devil, but he was pressing. He was throwing punches and bunches, and, were they landing? No, but he was throwing them. Martin Kampmann, if you're a boxer, was more precise. His defense was good. But, again, this is MMA, and for some odd reason, they only score on offense. They don't score on defense. So if you stuff a takedown, if you escape, if you reverse, if you do any of those things, no one gives a crap. But if you're, just swinging wildly, if you're the ballroom brawler, they give you points. Do I agree with it? No. Is this what they do? Yes. Therefore, that is why I scored the fight in the second round for Diego Sanchez. And I don't think anybody necessarily disagrees about the third round, but that second one seems to be the one that's controversial. So when you look at my scores, they're reflections of what I think the refs are thinking. Now, sometimes I get it wrong. I don't know how the refs came up with Ricky Fukuda, and we talked about that last week. And I'll be the first to admit, sometimes I don't know what these people are thinking or what drugs they're using. But that's neither here nor there. This is what I figured they thought. And you know what? I turned out to be right. So, And having said that, and we're going to explore all of this, but I wanted to get that right out there, right out in the open, right away. I score based on what I think the judges are doing, not what my personal opinion is. I can do my personal opinion on the show or in other columns elsewhere, but I don't think it necessarily belongs in the live coverage part of what I do. All right. So here to tell me that I don't know what I'm talking about is somebody who wrote an excellent column this week talking about leaving it in the hands of the judges and the role that whole phrase plays in this discussion. From the Rear Naked column, Samer Kadi. How's it going, Samer?
It's going well, despite all the judging atrocities we're seeing over the past 2 weeks, but it's going well.
I'm glad to hear it. Judging atrocities, yeah, that's good. One way to put it. And, of course, joining us with his opinions as well, Scott Kachowski from A View from the Cheap Seats. Howdy doody, Scott.
Morning, Mark. How are you doing?
Oh, you know how I'm doing. You can hear it. I'm excited. All right, then. All right, so let's get into this. So you guys heard my opening rap about the judges, and just Samer, what is your view of the judges and their philosophy and how they judge things? I mean, clearly there's a defined scoring system, but my interpretation is they see that, and like I said, they're looking for the aggression, they're looking for punches and bunches, and they don't care about defense at all. How do you see their scoring philosophy?
See, there's no problem with looking at punches and bunches, in my opinion, as long as they're actually landing. This is my big issue. The criteria is clean, effective offense, whether it's striking, grappling, it's even effective aggression. One of the problems is so many people haven't read the unified rules, and they just hear Mike Goldberg go through these the four criteria before every show, and the way he says it is effective striking, grappling, aggression, and octagon control. But if you actually read the unified rules, what he actually means is effective striking, effective grappling, and most importantly, effective aggression. And here's my issue with this. Now, Diego Sanchez was the aggressor. that doesn't necessarily mean he won the fight. I mean, if you look at the flurries he threw, he landed plenty of punches. Sure, he buckled Kampman at one point in the second round, but so many of them, Kampman were actually slipping the punches and countering. And the main problem I have with the way judges perceive fights is they don't really value effective counter-striking. Now, we saw that in B.J. Penn's fight against Frankie Edgar in Abu Dhabi, the first fight, that is, which I thought B.J. clearly won. I mean, so many people are going to disagree, that's fine, but for me, there's no doubt he won at least the first 3 rounds. And the thing is, in mixed martial arts, unlike boxing, is you can't always tell what is actually landing and what's not unless there's high impact. I mean, unless you have a counter-striker like Anderson Silva who's just killing people with his counter punches. I mean, it takes a blind man not to see them. Judges, more often than not, they're not going to value that. I mean, how else would you explain Leonard Garcia winning about 4 undeserved decisions in the past 2 years alone? He comes forward, he swings wildly, he misses, his opponent counters, and the judges value what Garcia is doing. Now, granted, I think Diego Sanchez was more effective than Garcia. He was less sloppy, obviously, and he still landed. But the way I look at things is, you look at Martin Kampman. Forget the first round, which in my opinion ended 10-8. But look at the next 2 rounds. I mean, I actually, on third viewing, I thought Kampman won every round, believe it or not. He had a jab in his face. Yeah. I mean, I guess the third round, I'm fine with 10-10. I'm not totally opposed to 10-9 for Sanchez. But you look at the way Martin Kampman was sticking his jab in his face, the way he was countering. Now, Sanchez was landing, sure, but I think what really impresses the judges is volume. He goes forward, he throws plenty of punches. They don't actually care what's landing, or they don't know what's landing. That's the problem, say. So you just see somebody throwing a lot of punches, his opponent backing up, and they value that as, oh, well, he's the aggressor, he's got octagon control, which I still think is one of the most misunderstood notions in the sport. And, yeah, so you look at who landed more, who landed cleaner, more effective shots. I think it's Kampman by far. Now, Kampman fought to his detriment the next 2 rounds where he kind of indulged in an ill-advised brawl. He should have stuck to his initial strategy, but that's neither here nor there. I mean, it was competitive, but I don't think it was particularly close. I think there's a difference between competitive and close, and in my opinion, I thought Kampman clearly won every round. I mean, you also got to take into account the takedowns. Sanchez shot like 14 takedowns and got 1 for about 5 seconds. Now, if you look at effective grappling, that's effective grappling on Kampman's part. And that's actually also octagon control because he managed to keep the fight up where he wanted it to be, whereas Sanchez was just shooting. And you can't call that aggression because it's not effective aggression, otherwise he would have gotten him to the ground. And you look at the final takedown, which is the only one he got, he did nothing with it, and Kampman got back to his feet 10 seconds later. I'm not saying that should be valued for nothing, but it counts for very little. I mean, think of it this way. Had Kampman landed 3 jabs, and then Sanchez got on the takedown, which one do you think the judges would have valued? The takedown, and in my opinion, that's silly. So, yeah, I know that's a major rant right there, but that was my view on the fight.
Now, Scott, let me ask you a question. Do you think that when a fighter should just get credit for the takedown attempt? Because that's what seems to be that's what seems the judges are doing. They're not interested in what you necessarily do with the takedown, and they're certainly not interested in the fighter stuffing the takedown or defending it. They just want to see that you went for it, and you can almost seems like the 14 attempts that Diego Sanchez could have been filed under not necessarily even takedown attempts, but aggression. You know, aggression and octagon control. So he's, you know, I sound like a lawyer when I talk this way, but you know, he's using effective aggression by at least attempting the takedowns, and so that limits the other guy's offense. And I want to add on one more thing to that. If you've got a guy like Martin Kampman, or earlier in the night, Cyril Debate. You've got these Muay Thai kickboxers and people that come from a boxing background who know how to circle and set things up, whatever. But they don't get any credit for it because then that's not being aggressive. What is your take on that? I mean, do you think that the judges really need sort of a re-education in effective use of defense, or there's just no way of getting around this? Essentially, if you don't walk in there and ballroom brawl, you're going to lose unless you just knock the guy out. Go ahead, Scott.
Well, this is one of those points that's really going to it's going to depend upon what the judges perceive while they're watching that particular bout. It's almost like the game that they play where what counts more, a submission attempt or defending against the submission. Yeah, and you can go back and forth about this, but from my point of view, it's the person that's attempting the submission because they are initiating the contact. They are, being aggressive. Maybe it's sloppy, okay, but to their credit, people have been submitted from sloppy, submissions before. So, I mean, whose fault is that? If somebody's shooting in for a takedown, that same judge that might think that a submission attempt is worth more than a submission defense might be saying to themselves, well, you know what, he is attempting a takedown. Might not be maybe he's shooting from across the octagon, whatever. He is attempting to do something. He is initiating action, so I'm going to give the nod to him. True, Martin Kampmann went ahead and he is defending, but, he is only defending because Diego Sanchez initiated, and that's, that is going to be one of the points that, and I think for a long time, and Diego Sanchez is one of those fighters that this is very typical of his fights, where he wins it by way of aggression. It is the fact that he is always coming forward nonstop, and while he might not be landing a lot of strikes, and his striking compared to guys like BJ Penn and Martin Kampmann is rudimentary, but is it effective? The judges seem to think so. And so, it's tough to try to tell him, maybe it's even tough for his coaches to say, hey, look, this isn't really the best. It's working, okay? And then you got to really, it's going to take somebody sitting down and asking the judges, how are you scoring this? What are you seeing here that is telling you that he's the winner? Samer is really kind of, hit the nail on the head with this, with the unified rules. For as many people that don't understand them, I honestly think the problem is that a lot of the judges don't understand them either. And even if they've read them, and even if in their mind they have an understanding of them, it's a lot of it is sort of subjective. What is, what do you consider effective? What do you, is initiating the contact, in a sloppy manner more important than defending it in a very clean manner? Is sloppy, punches and flurries much better than a tactical counterstrike? Because quite honestly, that counterstrike isn't going to come without that first fighter initiating. So you have to decide, what do you favor most?
Plus, that's interesting. It's an interesting thing because you both now have said counterstriking, and it's something I hadn't thought of. That if you're an effective counterstriker, it just doesn't seem to matter, unless you're Chuck Liddell and you can knock somebody out in the process of doing that. So essentially, if someone's throwing punches and bunches and you counterstrike and yours land clean, it's still considered defense, not offense, and therefore negligible for points. Does that?
Well, but I disagree there.
Go ahead, Sam.
I'm sorry, I disagree there because if you're landing the punch, it doesn't matter who's coming forward, who's backing up. If you're landing the punch, that's offense. It doesn't matter if your opponent is coming at you, landing every punch, and then you're landing the counter punches, fine. But if you're actually slipping his punches and landing a punch, that's offense. It doesn't matter who's actually initiating as long as you're the one landing the punch. This is my issue. Had both of them been landing punches, then yeah, I guess you could favor the more aggressive fighter. And Sanchez did land plenty of punches. Nobody's debating that. But I mean, you got to look at who's more effective. And to Scott's point, I certainly agree with him, and I think that's where the line is blurry in the judges' minds. But if you actually read the rules, it's not so blurry. I mean, yeah, there are a couple of instances where, yeah, for example, does a submission attempt count as much as a left hook does? You know, that's hard to define. So, yeah, I agree that in that sense it is subjective. But shooting takedowns and stuffing them, no doubt in my mind the opponent who's stuffing them should be awarded, because look at the unified rules and look at effective grappling. They elaborate on that. And part of what they elaborate is either scoring takedowns successfully or defending takedowns successfully and keeping the fight up. They also mentioned the same thing in octagon control, which is another criterion. And finally, there's effective defense, which Mike Goldberg doesn't mention, but it is there in the unified rules. So I think the problem is judges just need to read them. And, yeah, I am aware that not everything is crystal clear, but some things are. I mean, when you read stuffing the opponent's takedowns count as effective grappling. Is this really a blurry line? It looks pretty straightforward to me. So
that's like what you're saying is they're just not using them. It's like the judges, for some strange reason, have decided that there's a handful of things that they're going to focus on exclusively to the exclusion of everything else, including stuffing takedowns, and they just won't score people on that. Because if that were the case, there's a whole series of decisions that you could – I mean, part of the reason why I'm able to kind of figure out where the judge's head is on some of these things versus what I think should be is if I see a guy the Strikeforce last night, there was a couple of situations like this where the takedowns was getting stuffed, and you know, the guy couldn't get anywhere with takedowns. Where if you were going to keep with that criteria, that person could have easily won that decision, but they just don't use it. So I don't even think about it in terms of what I think of scoring. But what you're saying is it's there, they just don't seem to be using it. And so that then leads to the question, what is motivating the judges to score these fights this way? Because I'm not going to go into like a conspiracy thing where let me back up a second. I don't think that there's an active employ by the UFC to get the judges to reward fighters for sloppy aggression, because that makes it much more fun for the layman to watch. I don't think that's what it is. I would believe that UFC management is a separate entity from the judging staff. But then why do it? If you're an independent judge and you have no dog in the hunt as far as the marketability of the sport, then what then is informing your decision? I'm not going to ask you guys to play junior psychologists here. What is then informing your decision to ignore most of the scoring rationale in a fight and only focus on what appears to be the most exciting stuff? Go ahead, Samer. I'm going to let you weigh in on that.
I'm not sure it's about excitement. I just think not every judge clearly understands the sport. I think that's part of it. And I'm not claiming to be an expert, nor do I understand the sport better than people who have been following it for years. But I think it's laziness and sloppiness. I mean, it doesn't take much time for a judge to read the rules and try to understand them. And once you've read them enough, or you've understood them, they're planted in your head, so it becomes second nature. And I think that's the problem. It's almost subconsciously. Why I can't exactly tell you, but subconsciously, the moment a fighter is pushing forward, throwing with volume, shooting for takedowns, a judge thinks, oh yeah, well, he's the aggressor, he's got octagon control, so yeah, he's winning that fight. And in their defense, it's not just the judges. Plenty of fans seem to think that way too, and that fans are fans, but if you're a professional judge, you should understand the sport better than everybody, or at least scoring fights. I mean, that's your job. And
Scott, weigh in, but I want you to add this in there. Scott, would the judging benefit from having one judge whose school of thought is boxing, having one judge whose school of thought is jiu-jitsu, who has actually scored in jiu-jitsu grappling tournaments, and another one who's a wrestling judge? Because it seems like the judges all kind of see the things the same way. And I'm wondering, and something I brought up to a friend of mine the other day, I'm wondering if they would not benefit from 3 different schools of thought sitting on this panel. And so if you've got one that sees it one way, they're sort of balanced by the other 2 who see it, and can accurately judge what is good wrestling, what is good grappling, etc. Go ahead, Scott.
No, Mark. No, because I think at that point then we just have 3 judges all scoring the bouts 3 different ways. What we need is 3 judges all schooled on MMA. Period.
Okay.
That's what you need. You need 3 judges that are all schooled in MMA. We discussed this topic, and I know Samer and I have actually discussed this on the administrative board too. There is one distinct disadvantage, and I don't think a lot of people realize is that when we watch fights, we watch it from 5 to 10 feet above the cage. We have the clearest and most multiple angle view of everything that happens inside that ring. If we want to see a close-up, if we want to see something slowed down, if we want to see something replayed, we sitting at home have the ability to watch that, whereas the 3 people that make the most important decision are sitting at ground level watching the fight from below, watching it from almost ankle level, and most of the time without benefit of monitors or anything like that, plus all the background noise that comes with sitting in that arena. Who's seeing the same fight? So to try to say, well, what are they seeing? What are they scoring? Why, what's their rationale? We can't know that because we're watching it from the best possible angle, and they are not. And so from the moment the fight even starts, they're already viewing it from a different perspective than we are, and from my point of view, they are at a disadvantage in trying to score that fight. So that's probably why they don't see people slipping punches, and they're watching it through a cage, which is just, mayhem if you have to watch it through the cage. And it's just, the whole system needs to be fixed. They need to have a bank of monitors sitting in front of them. They need to be able to see everything that the home audience sees. They need to be able to independently rewind footage on their own so that they can see it. They shouldn't be watching a replay on the big screen and watching it with the rest of the crowd. They should already see that, and they don't in most cases. And as far as I know, there's no plans to even do that. So, but I mean that right there, that's just a classic example of what's wrong with the judging. We sit at home and we're like, oh, how did they not see that? Well, I'll tell you how they didn't see it. We have 12 potential views with guys whose whole job is running around the cage with a camera. They're sitting in a chair. That's how they didn't see it. And so, until they begin to address that, we're the whole who judges what and what their criteria is, they're not even able to see the fight. So I think that's going to be one of the first things that they're going to have to tackle.
Samer, go ahead.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, it's sad when anybody who's sitting at home watching on HD can see the fights better than the judges do. I mean, that's a serious issue right there, and why it has yet to be dealt with is beyond me, because it doesn't take much to put monitors for the judges. I mean, you look at Dana White when he's at cage side, you always see him looking down. He's watching the fight on a monitor. He's sitting cage side. In theory, he's supposed to have the best seat in the house, right? Yet he's watching on a monitor. And anybody who's ever been to a UFC event or any other MMA event that takes place in a cage, they'll tell you, no matter where you're sitting, you're going to end up watching on the big screen. Because you're seeing the action better. And Keith Kaiser, his theory is that, well, no, because in that case, if you put monitors, every judge is watching the fight from the same view. As though that's wrong. Do you really want judges to be seeing 3 different things? His theory is that no, that way fights are one-dimensional. What? I mean, when you're watching the fight on a monitor, you have like at least 4 cameras who, as Scott said, can just walk around the cage and give you every possible angle there. Eddie Bravo is sitting there in the trunk and giving instructions as to what they should show when fighters are on the ground, what's the best possible angle, all of that. You're going to tell me that watching it with a cage and the fence in front of you, and sometimes like fighters could be all the way across and one fighter can have the back at you, you're going to tell me that this is a better view? And there's no better proof of that than Judge Nelson Doc Hamilton, after the Mauricio Lyoto Machida fight, the first one, talking about how when he scored the fight for Machida, giving him round 2, 3, and 4, and which was kind of bizarre because everybody gave Shogun the 4th and 5th rounds, including the other 2 judges, and one of them was Cecil Peoples. So there you go. And when he rewatched the fight, he said that he had a very poor view on that 4th round, and he didn't see some of Shogun's offense. And after watching it, he said that he thought Shogun won that 4th round and making it on his scorecards, Shogun taking 1st, 4th, and 5th round, which would have made him the winner. Now, that wouldn't have affected the outcome of a fight because he had 2 other judges. But still, when a judge goes out there and tells you that he couldn't see the action, that's a red flag right there. Something should be done. Worse than that, and I'm not going to take too much time talking about this. I think we've discussed it enough. But more than that, I don't remember which event it was, but maybe UFC 125 with the Edgar Maynard fight. Judge Adelaide Bird, and now don't quote me on that because I'm not sure that was the fight at hand, but Adelaide Bird, who's not the best judge around, was seen looking at the big screen because 2 fighters were on the ground and they were kind of far away from her. Now, if the judges are allowed to look at the big screen, why aren't they provided with monitors? It makes no sense. And, yeah, those are my...
I'm wondering if that's benign neglect on the part of the UFC where, look, if we're figuring this out, I'm sure somebody else closer to the Fertitta, whatever the last name is, and Dana White has said to them, these judges might do better with monitors, and it hasn't happened yet. And so, again, I use the term benign neglect. It's just, it might, but, we're not going to do that right now. And then you have to wonder, to your point last week, don't bitch then about the judging if you're in a position to do something about it and you don't. Go ahead, Scott.
This is one case. I'm sorry, but this is one case where it's Kaiser who's actually in charge of this one. He's the one who's been Kaiser is I don't know what exactly is his position, but he works in the Nevada State Athletic Commission. But he's the one who's been anti-monitors. Now I'm sure if Dana and
why is he anti-monitors?
Because he thinks that monitors make fights one-dimensional, whereas having 3 different judges in 3 different positions make the fight 3-dimensional, which makes no sense, but there you go. And now, granted, I think if the Fertittas and Dana go out there and say, no, okay, too many decisions are getting screwed, we want monitors for the judges, I'm not sure the Athletic Commission will deny them that right. I mean, but it's not up to them. They can't just go around and, provide judges with monitors. They need the approval of the Athletic Commission first. So can they do something about it? Yeah, I think so. I don't think they're as guilty on that front as they are for taking inadequate judges overseas because Mark Ratner and the UFC have a say in that. On the monitors front, I don't know. They are partially to blame, yes.
There was a lot of comments, and now I'm granted, some of the comments that get written on 411 come from the just blockhead point of view. It's just angry young guys spouting off at the mouth without thinking much about it. It's the only interpretation I can come up with some of these points of view. But the collective one that stood out to me was, look at Diego Sanchez's face. Damaged face equals he lost the fight, as if, at the top of the list of criteria for the unified rules is if you done mess that guy's face up, he loses. Where I look at that and say, well, that's not any kind of criteria. You can get your face smashed in and still win a fight. That doesn't make neither here nor there. But that's how I saw that. Scott, what do you think about the people who think that way? That Diego Sanchez automatically lost that fight because Martin Kampmann tore his face to shreds. Does that mean anything to you? Do you think they're right?
Well, if that was the case, then BJ Penn would be undefeated. Well, I mean, that's just the thing. I mean, because some of these guys, because they've been competitive for so long. Marcus Davis was one who used to cut real easy. Forrest Griffin used to cut very easy. Vanderlei Silva, another one. If you use that as judging criteria, it makes it very difficult. Is that a telltale sign that somebody has landed a strike Sure. Okay. Does that mean that strike was the best? No, it wouldn't. Point of fact is Randy Couture lost the light heavyweight title to a cut sustained from Vitor Belfort's glove in a glancing blow. Well, I mean, hey, look, at the end, as they stood there at the end of the fight, Randy's eye was cut and starting to swell, and Vitor had no marks on him. So does that mean, Vitor definitely won there? You can't look at a fighter's face and just say, well, see, that's the telltale sign that guy lost. Or that guy won. I don't think that's fair. I mean, that's a variable that maybe a clue, and it might be an effective clue to saying, well, obviously some strikes landed. But like I said, if you looked at a fighter's face after a fight, and tried to judge it off that, then BJ Penn would be undefeated because he never gets cut, and he rarely ever bruises up.
The one that jumped out to me was Chael Sonnen and Anderson Silva, where, look, everyone gave him every round, and they would have given him the fifth round, too, had he not gotten caught in a triangle or he had escaped from it. Even if he had just ran around the ring for 5 minutes, he would have won that fight 4 rounds to 1, and he looked like he'd gone through the windshield, as Anderson Silva looked like, he didn't look like he had taken any damage to the face, despite the fact that Chael was hammering on him for 20 minutes. I think that's another good example of just because you've taken damage doesn't necessarily mean you lose. I don't quite understand where some of these guys are coming from with that. So just to wrap up that, Scott, did you give it to Kampman or did you give it to Sanchez?
I gave it to Kampman.
You gave it to Kampman
because I thought his striking was more effective. And you can even look on sites like Fight Metric, and you can see that Kampman clearly outscored him striking. But it didn't. I wasn't surprised. That's the thing when if you're a judge and you're watching it at ankle level and you're seeing Diego Sanchez constantly windmill and charging stalking Kampman, I'm sure maybe from their point of view they're like, wow, how could he not be winning? So I mean, I don't what were the judges thinking? Who knows? From my point of view, I thought Kampman easily outstruck Sanchez. I mean, his striking was more crisp. He landed better shots. He really looked like he was more in control. He did get sucked into the brawl, but yeah, I gave it to Kampman.
So if you're in Kampman's corner, and you're in Kampman's corner, and you're giving him instructions, and no one's new in Kampman's corner. Kampman's been doing this a long time. He's been in the UFC a long time. He's more familiar with all the stuff we're talking about than we could ever be. So is his corner. And everyone their sort of collective viewpoint is you got to win this because if this goes to the judges, who the hell knows which direction this is going to go in, and here's what you need to do to win. What do you tell this man so that he does that? And the reason why I'm asking this is you have this collective belief among some, and this goes to Samer's column, which is, well, he didn't do enough he made an active choice to, quote unquote, leave it in the hands of the judges. So this is why I'm asking that question. You either believe that somebody in that corner, said to him, do this much, and you will get points and you will win based on a judge's decision, or they said, look, don't forget about it. Just this is what you need to do to win the fight, either by knockout or submission, etc. Go do that. Is there anybody telling any of these fighters, no, only do X, so that way we can go to a decision and win this fight? Samer, this seemed to have bothered you in particular, so I want you to speak to that. You're in Kampman's corner. What are they telling him to do? Are they saying, try for the decision, you've really got this one? Or are they saying, no, win this damn fight? Are they instructing him to leave it to the judges, quote unquote?
Well, here's the thing. I don't think a corner or a fighter should have to worry about the judges. They should worry about strategy, what they're doing right or wrong, not the finish. If you worry too much about the finish, it's not going to come. That's not to say that you shouldn't look for the finish. And one of the commoners, actually, I think it was the last comment in my column, criticized me because they took it as though I'm discouraging fighters to go for the finish. That's not my point. You go for the finish, you should. Not because you shouldn't leave it in the hands of the judges, but because as long as your opponent is still in there, you can lose. One punch can knock you out. One submission. You can fall on your leg and get injured and lose the fight. So, of course, you should go for the finish. But criticizing a fighter when he doesn't, this is my issue. And Campman, after he took that first round, if I'm in his corner, I tell him to keep going. Now, after that, keep doing what you're doing. After that second round, yes, I didn't think Campman had the best strategy because Sanchez, to his credit, he made an ugly fight, quote-unquote ugly fight. That's not to say that the fight was bad. In fact, it was awesome. But he turned it ugly. He made it a brawl. He made it a dogfight. And that played to his advantage. And Campman should have stuck and moved, countered effectively. Even though I thought he won that second round, I think his corner after that second round should have told him to, use your footwork more, counter. If he attempts to brawl, circle out. But at no point do I think they should have told him, oh, well, the judges might screw this one up, so you go ahead and go for the finish. No, I only think they should say that when if they feel he's losing. If you're losing 2 rounds and then you're in the third, you tell your fighter to go for broke. But you shouldn't have to worry about the judges. You already have a lot to worry about to begin with because you have an opponent in there who's looking to take your head off. And I said it in my column. Which one is harder, knocking another world-class fighter with an iron chin like Sanchez out, or judging a fight properly? I mean, if you're sitting on a table looking at 2 people punching each other, and you have to decide who's the winner. Of course, there are decisions that are going to be difficult to score. Of course, nobody's claiming that judges should be crucified for every quote-unquote screw-up. No, but a fighter's job is much, much harder. So don't leave it in the hands of the judges thing. It drives me nuts, honestly. I gave the Jason Brills Nogueira example. I mean, Rogerio Nogueira has been finished once in his entire career by Sokochu, who has otherworldly power. Brills was thought to be the inferior fighter. Supposedly he's done enough to win the fight. In fact, he got the closest to the finish. He rocked Nogueira and actually got him in a guillotine. And after he goes through a heartbreaking decision loss, you're going to tell him, oh, well, it's your fault. You left it to the judges? I think that's crap.
I want to pause here. We actually have a caller. So I'm going to take the time to bring the caller into the discussion. Area code 216. You are on the 411 Ground and Pound radio show. What's your name and where you calling from?
What's going on, man? How you doing? This is Zach Wright, right here from Cleveland, Ohio.
All right, Cleveland rocks. Go ahead with your question or comment, sir.
Right on. Dude, I was watching a fight with Campman in it, and dude totally won, man. I mean, what's the deal? It seems to me, I check out the blogs and whatnot, and it seems to be a lot of problems with judges judging these MMA fights. And I want to know what your opinion on these judges. I mean, that loss for him really upset me big time.
Well, like I said at the top of the show, I think the judges come from a boxing philosophy, but they also seem to be solely focused on who's being the aggressor, not whether or not the aggression is effective, just who's being the aggressor. Otherwise, I don't understand where the rationale for, and they're not giving any credit to any of the wrestling, any of the grappling, or any defense. So,
right.
Is it crap? Yeah, I agree. But that's if I had to read minds, that would be the only thing I can come up with for a rationale for how they score that way. And you've heard Scott and Samer say, their opinions on the judging. They seem to be coming from the standpoint of view of part of it is, well, they may have good intentions, they just can't see the damn fight as well as maybe the rest of us.
Yeah, I don't know, man. It's just I was watching a fight. It seemed like Campman had it the first 2 rounds. But on the last round, the other guy, he did a little bit better. But I still believe that he won that fight, though. I definitely do agree. I mean, just listen to all the boos that was going on within the fight. Hello?
Yeah, no, we're with you. You're right. And this is one of those travesties in judging. I would love to see some of the other journalists who are a little bit closer to the sport with more access really delve into this and talk to the judges, get interviews with them after the fight, because you always see interviews with either Scott Coker or Dana White. You see interviews with the fighters. I want to know from the refs. I want to know from the judges, what exactly were you thinking while you scored this thing? You got a final word there, sir?
No, not really, man. Just
all right. Thanks for calling in.
Getting awesome. Yeah, man.
All right, great. So, we had talked about this last week with John Fitch. Do you think there are some fighters who, purposely leave it in the hands of the judges? Do they go in with the mindset of, I can win this by outscoring them? Are there fighters that really think that way, or do you go with, Scott? Do you go with the sort of, this is a myth that the fans have kind of created, or that Dana has perpetuated by making those kinds of statements? Never leave it in the hands of the judges, as if the fighters are actively doing this. They go in there with, that's my game plan.
Absolutely. I think that there are, and I think their records kind of speak for themselves. I believe it was during the UFC 127 leading up to the pay-per-view, they mentioned that John Fitch, the guys with the most decision wins in the UFC were John Fitch, Gray Maynard, and George St. Pierre. And it's funny because both John Fitch and, actually all three of those people at times, George St. Pierre less often, I think, because he's just more beloved as a fighter, but all three of those fighters have been criticized very heavily because they seemingly have a what most people consider a boring style. And that's actually something I was going to discuss this week, in an article. There's a fine line between being a tactician and being boring. And I think some fighters have, John Fitch is a case in point, world-class wrestler with a stifling top game, where he knows if he can get you down on the ground and against the cage, there is going to be little you will ever be able to do to change that situation. And even if you can do it once or twice, he's big enough and strong enough so that you're probably not going to be able to do it a lot more times. Well, if you can always win a fight that way, do I think this is right? No, but I'm sure from his mindset, and when I say right, I'm not trying to, you go with what you know, but from his mindset, if that always works, why change it? But it's sort of a trade-off. You might be extremely successful, and that's great. And winning is, especially in these sports, winning is key. But if nobody wants to watch you, how as a promoter do you factor that person into trying to get fans to come to your event, trying to buy your pay-per-view?
That's a great point, Scott.
And I think you see Dana White trying to, I think you see him trying to handle that. You have guys like Ray Maynard and John Fitch who are very successful. You can't argue with their success. But if people don't want to buy tickets or don't want to buy a pay-per-view to watch that person, do their craft for 25 minutes, it's tough to get behind and push that person.
Samer, I want to ask you one last question on this, and based on a comment that I saw. It was one of the first comments once I posted the actual report. And if you watch South Park, this is actually even funnier. 1, swing wildly. 2, get your face punched into tomorrow. 3, get one takedown after 50 attempts when you get kneed in the face. 4, ? 5, profit. Which, if you've seen the Underpants Slam episode, that's pretty hilarious. As much as the comments make me roll my eyes, that one had me laughing out loud. But the question then becomes, it's sort of half Dana White subtly poking at people, and half somebody who watches this fight, somebody who watches the Leonard Garcia-Nam fan fight, with the trap door underneath you the way it is in the UFC, and the way it really can be in any sport where where it's this physical. Does a guy who is technically proficient start to look at himself in the mirror based on stuff like this and say, you know what? I need to be Conan the Barbarian in there, or I'm going to lose my job. I may not even lose the fight, but as Scott's indicating, I'm not a fast and furious and fun to watch marketable fighter, and therefore I'm going to lose. Is this the sort of thing that sort of changes the whole game around into what the worst critics of this thing say, and that is this becomes even much more so a blood sport? Can you speak to that?
Yeah. There should be, every fighter should be able to draw a line in there. I mean, no matter how much you're getting criticized, if you want to go out there and try to put on more exciting fights, more power to you. I mean, we're the ones benefiting from that. But that doesn't mean that you should may endure a complete overhaul for your style and just go fight like Chris Lytle or, I don't know,
you think they
Leonard
will, though?
Garcia.
Do you think a lot of guys will, though?
No, and nor do I think they should. I think one of the things we have to take into account is that not every fighter has a Anderson Silva, BJ Penn type skill set where their offensive arsenal lends itself into killing people. I mean, Anderson Silva has this otherworldly striking and insane power. I mean, it seems if he touches you, you're out. If he doesn't touch you and you're out, he'll just overwhelm you with Muay Thai strikes, Muay Thai clinch, and he's good on the ground too. BJ Penn, I don't think he's as aggressive on the feet, but he's got heavy hands, he's got technical striking, and on the ground, he kills people. I mean, I still, one of the things that can still kind of annoy me is I hear people talking about the best jiu-jitsu practitioners in the sport, and BJ Penn doesn't get mentioned. This dude's top game is sick, and not every fighter has that. John Fitch is an awesome fighter. I don't think anybody will debate that, and if they do, then I don't think they know what they're talking about. Not awesome to watch, mind you, but he's a great fighter. But his skill set, he's not as dynamic as a BJ Penn on top. He doesn't have the submissions of Damian Maia from the bottom. He doesn't have the power of, a Chuck Liddell. So what does this guy do? Now, do I think John Fitch can be more exciting? I think he can. I think maybe he should, not just for sake of being exciting, but for saying it would help his fighting style. It would help him inside the cage win fights. You look at his fight with Ben Saunders a year ago. Ben Saunders clearly had nothing for John Fitch. Fitch took him to the ground, just stuck in half guard, even though he could have passed at any time and just landed short elbows. When I see that, it is aggravating, not because I'm bored to death watching it. I mean, it's not the most exciting thing, but I'm fine with it. But just because you can do more, why not? I mean, Ben Saunders is going to scramble on his feet and just kill you. You totally own this dude on the ground. Why not do more? But we should also take into account that Gray Maynard, for example, has his limitations. He's a good wrestler. He's got good power. He's improved his striking. I mean, the fight with Edgar was the best fight of the year so far. But on top, he's not the most active guy. By choice, maybe, but also by just in terms of skill set. He's not a George St. Pierre in terms of guard passing. He's not a Cain Velasquez in terms of ground and pound. So what can he do? Does he risk losing position and, getting too wild and potentially get submitted from the bottom, or he sticks to what he knows? Do I think he should work on that in the training camp? Yeah, sure. You should always improve as a fighter, not just to be more exciting, just to be a better fighter. It would help more if he could land more ground and pound, if he can go for submissions, absolutely. But I think every fighter at the end of the day should look at just being a better fighter. More exciting, I think we saw an example of that with Lyoto Machida. Early on, he was just getting decisions. He was frustrating to watch, and then basically he knew that a title shot would be a very long shot as long as he keeps fighting like that, and suddenly he knocks Thiago Silva out, then he knocks Rashad Evans out, and then he gets knocked out by Mauricio Hua. So where do you draw the line? It is kind of a sensitive issue, and I think it ultimately goes down to every fighter. In my opinion, you should work on being more active, absolutely, but not just for the sake of being exciting and potentially risk losing sponsorship, losing bonus money. I mean, we have to take that into account as well. People criticize GSP, but this man has a lot to lose. So if he loses a fight, I mean, we're talking about thousands and thousands of dollars, and I don't think we should just look at that from a selfish perspective.
No, I would agree. You know, there are two things that come out of this for me. I'll say this and then we'll move on. One, look, chess, if you understand chess, is very interesting to watch and can be fun to watch if you can appreciate what exactly chess is. If you're watching it and you're watching two guys play chess and you really understand, you know, the concept of thinking 5 moves ahead and what guys do, it actually, we're not talking roller coaster ride excitement here, but, you know, it can be exciting if you can truly appreciate the game of chess. And that's what I think about when I think about jiu-jitsu and wrestling. If you know your jiu-jitsu and you know your wrestling, what seems like two guys spooning on the mat, as some folks have called it, you know, laying each other's guard or whatever, is really patience, you know, waiting for them. I mean, there's a very American, I think, I'll be prejudiced about this. I think it's a very American thing where you just want to see a slugfest, and there's not a lot of appreciation for the slower combat sports that require patience, and you don't muscle the other guy necessarily in jiu-jitsu and wrestling. There's a lot of technique, and again, I keep throwing out the word patience. You know, waiting for your spot to move, and that's what a lot of those guys are doing. To the layman, or to anyone watching, it looks like they're laying there, but you're not them. You're not kind of weighing on the scale. Wondering what is this guy going to do next, and looking for your opportunity to pass or to shift or grab at a limb, etc. And so that's why I compare it to chess. And unfortunately, so some folks will be educated about the sport and they'll see that, they'll appreciate that, and they won't and they won't be Mole Man from The Simpsons going, "We came for blood." On the other hand, that's the element, though, that I think drives a lot of this. Is sure, we all appreciate the martial arts. I had a buddy of mine say this to me the other day. I don't like to watch MMA, the UFC anymore. I don't like to watch a lot of MMA because it's devolved into, some of it has devolved into sort of the old FX Tough Man show, and the martial arts aspect of it that requires some degree of patience and understanding seems to have evaporated out of this. But the other part of this is, I think we as fans sometimes can't make up our minds, because you look at Strikeforce card last night, a lot of especially in the undercard, almost every one of them ended in finishes. I think the last Strikeforce card, even on the main card, almost every one of them were finishes. And on the one hand, you see how much better Strikeforce is than the UFC, all finishes, no decisions. And then the other half of the group saying, that's because they all suck. They're all terrible. One commenter actually said something to the effect of, well, just because you have finishes doesn't necessarily make it a good fight. Basically, you have mismatches. And that may be true in some cases, but I don't think that's the general rule. And even if it was, what is it we all want here? Do we want the hardest fought victories among the most matched up guys, which is going to produce a lot of decisions because there's only so many variables at play? Or do you want, pros versus Joes and seeing people get knocked out all over the place, which is fun, but I think the novelty wears off after a while. But, we spent a lot of time talking about judges today, and I really want to quickly, because there's 2 instances of this over the past couple of days, one last night and one at the UFC show, where a ref allegedly stopped the match early. And in the case of the UFC, I'm specifically referring to C.B. Dalloway and Mark Munoz. Scott, do you think the referee ended that fight too early?
No.
Okay.
You could see Dalloway went to sleep. He was out for just really a fraction of a second, but that's enough. I am not a big proponent of when a fighter gets knocked down and you can tell he's out, and then he hits the ground and is able to wake back up, and that fight's allowed to continue. I think that's bad practice. I think when it's evident a fighter goes out, and you have to trust that the referee being right there is in the best possible, has the best possible vantage point to see it. I say stop it. Let him fight another day. Okay. And if the crowd gets upset, well, hey, crowd gets upset. But you could see Dalloway went there. It was for a fraction of a second, but he was out. That was a good stoppage.
Do you agree, Samer? Do you think that was a necessary stoppage?
I think it was justifiable. I mean, he probably could have let him eat an extra hammer fist just in case, but I don't think it was anything. I'm actually surprised that some people, there was like kind of an outrage about that. I don't think it was a bad stoppage. Perhaps not the best, yes, but Mario Yamasaki, we should keep in mind that he's not a ref known for stopping fights early. I was okay with the stoppage.
Okay. Just real quickly, the Bellator 35, Samer, the stoppage between, it was a submission stoppage between Lapsley and Heron. That's another one that's getting a lot of feedback where people didn't agree with the stoppage. Certainly, Lapsley jumped up and said, "Hey, I'm awake. I can do this. Why'd you stop it for?" Necessary stoppage there, or do you feel like Rosendahl could have let that one go a little bit further?
I think he should have, because you always need to assess the situation at hand. It was a rear naked choke. Worst case scenario, what? He holds on to the choke an extra 2 seconds. He's not going to die because of it. Had it been an arm bar where you thought maybe his elbow was going to pop out or whatever, then yeah, maybe. That's not to say that refs should, allow fighters to get choked out where they're already unconscious. No, but I think he could have done a more careful job of making sure the fighter was completely out. I didn't think it would have made any difference, because how many times do you see fighters escape a fully locked rear naked choke? Almost never. Your opponent isn't going to suddenly, loosen his grip and you're just going to turn around. Maybe if you had back control, but once the hooks and the choke is actually sunk in, you're pretty much done. I don't think it was going to make a hell of a difference, but I think maybe Rosenthal could have allowed that to go, further 2-3 seconds, just to check.
Let's talk about Strikeforce last night. Dan Henderson. It was a hell of a performance by Dan Henderson last night. He not the most technically proficient thing I've ever seen, but it definitely looked like he took advantage of a starstruck Cavalcante. Cavalcante did not perform the way he did over the summer against King Mo.
Moldawa.
Excuse me?
I said Moldawa. King Mo.
Yeah. I don't think he has performed as well against King Mo in the fight with Henderson, and I think Henderson stayed calm, was able to do what he does and capture the title. And I'll tell you what, and I tweeted this to Scott Coker last night. Boy, if you guys ever deserved a win, something where last week we keep talking about they all their eggs in one basket and then they trip and fall on the basket. Well, finally they actually made it to the finish line, egg intact. So, bravo! You won 1 out of 5. But Scott, what did you think of the Henderson Cavalcante fight? Where was Cavalcante's head at during that fight?
It's hard to say. He just, the first round, I thought he looked good. He caught Hendo, put him down, and I thought, oh, okay, this is how this fight's going to go. But just, once he landed that big shot, and then you could see he was going to, he headhunted after that. He had success with that one punch, and then after that just stopped really setting anything up. And Henderson, looked good. It looked like his cardio was there. It looked like he, wasn't having any real issues, and was, just. Dan Henderson's one of those guys, just, very, very tough. Very, very tough, Feijao's, he's a young guy, so, I mean, this is one of those losses that's, hey, he loses his title, but...
A loss to learn from?
Yeah, I mean, hopefully it's something to learn from. It's something to learn that, look, because you're right, when he fought Lawal, it was like, well, you know what, we're both young bucks, but, I'm going to take your title.
Right.
Suddenly he's in there with a guy who, I mean, and everybody considers Dan Henderson a legend. If you don't, you just don't know anything about MMA. And, so, of course, he's starstruck. I mean, it would probably been the same thing if he'd been in there with Randy Couture. So.
All right, let's take another caller. Area code 803, welcome to the 411 Ground and Pound Radio Show. What's your name and where are you calling from? Hello, 803?
Yeah, man, am I on the air?
Yes, you are, sir. Go ahead with your call.
Hey, this is Tommy, man, long-time listener, first-time caller. Thanks for taking the call.
All right, glad you could be on the show. What's your question or comment?
I just wanted to ask real quick. I got to go, but have you guys talked about Chris Cyborg Santos going to WWE? And if she does, do you think that that's pretty much going to be the nail in the coffin for women's MMA and Strikeforce? Thanks, guys.
I'm going to throw that one over to Samer because actually I wanted to bring that up next. So go ahead, Samer. Why don't you answer this gentleman's question, and then let's talk a little bit about the Carmouche-Conan fight last night.
All right. By all accounts, there is some truth to the rumors. Tatame, which is the Brazilian media outlet who reported this, haven't. I'm not going to say they aren't reliable. They are, but they've been known to report some just some of these like rumors. Somebody throws around something, it sticks, and then they just go ahead and run with it. So it's nothing set in stone. It's just rumors so far as I can tell. If it does happen, does it mean it's the end of women's MMA in Strikeforce? I'm not sure. If Gina Carano fights, maybe she'll win the vacate title or something. I think people are always going to care when Gina fights. The Strikeforce 135-pound women's division is excellent. We've seen the fight last night. It was great. I think it's much more deep. So I don't think it would be the death. No.
You had started to say something last week, and due to technical difficulties, we ran a slightly long last week and just ran out of Blog Talk Radio time. But as we were wrapping up the show, you were starting to talk about the Conan Carmouche fight, and I want to test your recall here. If you could go back to that and just kind of finish up what you were saying about that fight, and then tell me what exactly you thought about Carmouche's performance, and then I had referred to it in the reportage as Conan's sort of Anderson Silva moment, where she was starting to lose the rounds pretty handily, and then she took advantage of a tiring Carmouche and slapped on that triangle, which was a thing of beauty. I want you to speak to that. What were your thoughts, and what did you think going into that fight?
Right. I was surprised with what was going on. I remember last week I think your question was along the lines of, is this just a last-ditch replacement? And they just found a girl who was willing to fight and threw her in there, or is she a suitable replacement? And I thought, having seen her fight twice, I thought she was pretty talented, Carmouche that is. And I thought she would give Conan a good fight. She did way better than I thought, but I didn't think she was going to get run over by any means. But Conan, that's the thing with her. She can tap any woman in that division out, especially from the bottom. Her arm bars, her triangles, she's an excellent grappler. She training in Germany with Golden Glory and all those guys. Her striking is coming along too. But on the ground, that girl is just, she's one of the best grapplers in the women's division. And the thing is, Carmouche, I was actually quite surprised by how well she's acquainted herself, especially when she was on top and just pounding on her towards the end of the second and third rounds. She wasn't getting, she wasn't in any danger of being submitted. It was actually you call it an Anderson Silva moment. That's actually a good analogy. It was similar to Chael Sonnen, where he was at no point was he in danger of getting submitted, and then out of nowhere, bam, triangle. It was kind of similar, but the way Conan wrapped up that triangle, man, that was textbook. The moment she was taken down, she had it wrapped up. I thought it was a great fight, one of the better women's fights we've seen on Strikeforce, and I thought it was a very, very good co-main event, and it didn't cap off a great night. Dan Henderson did that, but it was a great fight on a great night for Strikeforce, where I wouldn't say everything went along as planned, but things went pretty smooth overall.
I really thought it was a great card. I thought it was a win for Strikeforce overall, considering the heartaches that they've had lately. And I immediately after Conan won that fight, my first, I was doing coverage on Twitter and on Facebook. I am Mr. Social Network over here. But immediately, I was every place I could post this. I said, for the love of God, promote your women's division. It's the one edge you have over the UFC, because they've got nothing to match you with it. And to me, Conan can be a star. She's so she's one of these people who if you put out there and you get her talking, she's well spoken, she's soft spoken, sort of meek and humble, yet clearly, you know, a champion's champion. I mean, that's somebody you want to go get out there and, you know, promoting the Strikeforce brand. And so I was really happy with that fight. I was probably, as much as I enjoyed seeing Dan Henderson knock the stuffing out of Cavalcante, that was my favorite fight of the night. I mean, it was just, you know, and it was also an indicator of just how important the championship rounds could be, because if that was a 3-round fight, she'd have lost by decision. So it was a lot of fun. Tim Kennedy put the hurting on Melvin Manhoff last night, and immediately said, "Look, before I go back to war, I would like another fight, and I want somebody who, you know, who's a worthy opponent." He called out Robbie Lawler. You know, he said maybe a rematch with Jacare. I had said I think the fight that puts the most butts in seats is him versus Mayhem, which I got a pretty funny response to that, allegedly from Mayhem. But who do you know, you get hired tomorrow to be the booker for Strikeforce, Scott. Who do you think Tim Kennedy fights next and when? If they made any sense at all?
I'd give him a title shot. You know, he's
even with the possibility going away again?
I'd give it to him.
Okay.
Well, okay, Robbie Lawler, probably a good fight, all right, but I believe Robbie Lawler's coming off of a loss, so, you know, Kennedy coming off of a win. They both got wins over Manhoff, but, you know, I don't know. I don't know that I'd match him up with Robbie Lawler. He's already split with Mayhem before, so, you know, let's make a new matchup. And who else is in line for a title shot? So
there's a lot of truth to that. I think it's one of the criticisms of Strikeforce is there's two ways to look at it: glass half empty, glass half full. Either these are stacked divisions with a lot of equal fighters, or it's a division where the champion sits just head and shoulders over everybody else, except in the light heavyweight division.
Well,
so yeah, who do you match him up with?
Tim Kennedy's a really good fighter. He's a great personality. You know, I mean, he is Strikeforce's Brian Stan. And they can, you know, put him out there and they can get behind him and they can, you know, run with him. That would be, you know, from my point of view, his story, you know, could sell itself. And I think having him against Jacare it'd be a good fight. You know, it'd be a good fight. It's a good story. It's a nice build-up. Why not?
Yeah, I think my only concern with putting him against Jacare would be, you know, and then so he wins the title, then goes back into the service and can't fight for a while, or God forbid something happens to him. They're kind of in a pickle, which is why I think, you know, you put him with the featured fights, you know, give him a rubber match with Mayhem, just for the giggles of it all. So what's next for Dan Henderson, Samer? Real quick, where does he go from here? Because as I said before, the light heavyweight division, they've done hot potato now with this title, and you know, so who does he fight next? Who matches up well against Dan Henderson? Who deserves it?
I would say if Mousasi were to win his next fight, which I think is scheduled to take on Mike Kyle, I think that's when Henderson first signed with Strikeforce, that was the fight I wanted to see. Mousasi, Henderson, that would be awesome. If Mo Lawal wins his next fight and is willing to fight Henderson, then that would be good as well. But Lawal has just lost his title. So I think Gegard Mousasi, if he wins his next fight, it will be a no-brainer. Just one thing, guys, Kennedy and Jacare have already fought, like, just a few months ago. Kennedy earned the title shot, and Jacare won the decision. I'm not sure if Strikeforce would be willing to give them a rematch that soon.
Yeah, that was my thought, too. And I was thinking about, they've got Lawal scheduled to come back in June. Do you give him a welcome back fight, or do you give him an immediate match with Dan Henderson? You know, it's hard to say because there's fairness, there's logic, and then there's Strikeforce. So who knows?
Guys, one more thing, guys. I'm sorry, I got to run, but I'll be looking forward to seeing you guys next week.
Yep.
But I'm sure
I'm going to talk about what's in the rear naked column for this week coming up before you go?
Right. Well, the plan was to have another Q&A column, which I did once a couple of months back, But idiot that I am, I forgot to mention this in the last week's column, so, well, there won't be any questions to answer. So right now I'm left scrambling and looking for something to talk about. The plan, as it stands, is to talk about Dan Henderson's legacy. I think, he's one of the more decorated fighters out there, having won in Pride, 2 titles, and now Strikeforce. The main idea is not to overblow the significance of him winning a title with no history behind it and that nobody cares about. It was a great win because he beat a very good fighter. But the title itself, I'm not sure it should be taken, into account. I mean, if he goes to Bellator and somehow wins their light heavyweight title, would that be a huge achievement? So the idea is it depends who you beat, and I just think he beat a great fighter, and that should count, not the title itself in this instance. And okay. I'll see you guys next week.
Sounds like a plan. Scott, before we close out the show, there were some comments that people had sent in, and I'm going to throw them over to you. Well, one person who went by the name of Guest9477 had been wondering about what you guys think of Bones getting a title shot 5 weeks after fighting Bader. I think it was pretty shrewd of Dana to offer him the fight in the cage in front of millions of people after his biggest win to date. I guess Dana really didn't have a choice, but he knew there was no way Bones would turn down the Shogun fight in that situation. So the question is, what was your 50-word or less thought about Bones getting the title? Worthy or not worthy? Do you think Dana just was between a rock and a hard place?
I think it was worthy, and I think Bones did a good job of acting surprised. He's not a babe in the woods. He had once Rashad was out of the title picture, I'm sure Bones had to know that he was on the list on the short list of people that would probably be available for that fight, and so it was nice that he acted surprised, but he had to at least have some inkling that was going to happen. I don't believe he lives in a vacuum, and I'm sure their camp had to know that was, he won impressively, and it was probably put in his ear beforehand. Hey, look, if this is a really good win for you, you could be sniffing yourself a title shot. So it worked out. He took it. Did anybody expect him to say no? No, I'm not ready for that. No, of course not. Nobody's going to say that, and I'm sure it was probably a little bit more pressure inside the octagon, but it's worked out, and I think it's a better main event.
Yeah, it'll be interesting if he beats Shogun and then Rampage beats Matt Hamill. I think they've got a very, very good fight in Matt Hamill. In Bones versus Rampage later on in the year. I think that's going to be quite the sellout crowd for that one. So, all right, that brings us to the end of the show. What do you got going on for the rear to view from the cheap seats?
This week, I'm going to break down some of the issues I have with point fighters who are happy to go to a decision or seem as though they're their goal is to take it to a decision. I know we've discussed this earlier that maybe it's not necessarily their goal, but I think that there is and their records kind of prove it. There seems to be some fighters who they seem to think that they just want to go in there and they want to do enough to win, and you can kind of hear that in their post-fight interviews where, when they're asked, well, what did you think? Well, I thought I did enough to win. Okay, well, that's different than saying that you won. Okay, and I think that's a mindset, and that's kind of what I'm going to tackle this week.
Okay, and then next, we have coming up this week another, what does Larry call it, the upgrade, downgrade? We've got that. We've got Shark Fights 14, which I will be doing live coverage for on Friday. I presume there'll be a roundtable for that as well. On Saturday is Bellator 36 from Shreveport, Louisiana, and I believe that that's going to feature the lightweight tournament. The lightweight tournament. So we will discuss that as well, and we will be previewing the aforementioned Jones versus Shogun Hua. Early prediction: who do you think has that, Shogun or Jones?
Oof. It's tough to pick against John Jones at this point. Shogun is going to be, the veteran out there, and I'm certain he's coming in with, some plans to, stop the John Jones train. But, it's tough to bet against John Jones at this point.
Okay. Okay, that brings us to the end of the 411 Ground and Pound radio show. I want to thank everybody for calling in. I want to thank those of you who have commented on Samer's pieces, Scott's pieces, all of my live coverage, including the guy out there who thinks I don't know if you saw this, Scott. I made a joke about Tito Ortiz. This is coming off our previous week's discussion. Tito Ortiz getting injured, and I was playing up on that, and so I did the strike with somebody wanted to challenge. Igor wanted to challenge Tito Ortiz, and I said, he'll probably pull out of the fight with an alleged injury, and I crossed that out and says he's a champion and needs time to heal. Someone didn't like that at all, called me a pussy and everything else, and said, you'll never say it to Tito's face. Probably not. But then again, I don't see too many instances where Tito and I are going to, A, be in the same room, B, have that conversation. But whatever. A lot of sensitive people on 411 for an angry guy's punch, don't you think?
Well, I thought it was funny. I got a chuckle out of it when I read it. And I actually did read that comment, and I thought to myself, hey, who knew Tito Ortiz, actually, surfed our site? So
exactly.
Or at least the president of his fan club does.
Yeah, Tito Ortiz is the Silent Bob and Jay with the list of people on the internet go house to house punching him in the face. Don't cry, sir. It was a joke. It was a joke. Don't be so sensitive. But if you do want to be sensitive and want to yell at me, give us a call next week. The Pound Show. We'll be happy to take your call, and we will cover all the aforementioned subjects. I want to thank Scott for being with us again, and that's it. We'll talk to you again next week. Have a good day, everyone. Bye, Scott.
We'll see you, Mark.
Hi, I'm Benny Jr. with Bartow Ford. You've heard me talk about all of our awards and sales numbers, but sometimes we fail to mention what really makes that happen. Simply put, that's our culture. Our founding father, Ernest Smith, a long time ago, came up with a philosophy that said, take care of the customers, take care of the employees, and take care of the community that you live in. My father carried on that tradition and taught it to me. We have not strayed from that philosophy for over 73 years, nor will we ever, because at Bartow Ford, we're different, and we prove it.
Hey there, it's your friend Ryan Reed with Read and Read. I'll get you right back to your favorite podcast, but quickly, I want you to know if you're injured in a car accident, slip and fall, or through medical malpractice, you can count on Read and Read to be here when you call. You'll speak to me, my wife, or my dad directly on the phone, or you can meet us in person or on Zoom for a free consultation. Visit needread.com today for more information, and remember, with Read and Read, it's like having a lawyer in the family. Needread.com, offices Tampa Bay.